In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, Sustainer, I am bold to bring you this word today. So December 11th, halfway through our wait, more than halfway in the liturgical calendar, and we're still talking about John the Baptist. John's in prison, and it's not going to end well, just in case you haven't read ahead. It's not going to end well, and he knows it. And he's spent his time in the field, and he's done what he's done, and he's baptized Jesus and all of that. But now he's on a death watch. And so he sends his disciples to Jesus to ask the only question that matters to him right now, and the question, in fact, that's on everybody's lips. Are you the one? Is this it? Is it finally time? For John represents the most recent of those haggard folk who have proclaimed that the end of something is near and that the beginning of something else will soon follow. And as a prophet of the Most High, I'm not sure John expected to get an answer to his question. Prophets don't generally get answers to their questions. Prophets raise questions instead. They take the long view. They have to be satisfied with the not knowing. But maybe being in prison, maybe with the death sentence hanging over his head, John has finally decided, well, I can't lose anything by asking. So he asks. We'll get to the answer in a minute. I want to think about the question first, because the question has been a problem for God's people down the ages. Is it time? Are we done? Is it now? The prophecies never seem to be completed, and they never seem to end. Even now, there are folks who will predict the renewal and the rejoicing that comes only at the end of things. And those people pop up when times are tough, when there are wars and rumors of war, when the economy's in the tank and the politicians don't know their own minds. The prophets of the end are everywhere, even these days. And they would like to think that they know the answer, but they are still predicting a distant thing. The hope is still, it seems, a long ways off. And because of this and because of history, we remember prophets in a less than flattering light. They are always too happy to talk about the time just before the end, when everything goes egg-shaped. We heard some of that last week, in fact, from John the Baptist. Right? The whole brood of vipers speech. Fire and brimstone, and you will be tested, and the chaff will be thrown away, and all of that jazz. The great reckoning is what John is predicting, that comes just before this bold new thing that God has to offer. And even Jesus takes his turn, talking about, in one of the Gospels at least, the signs in the heavens and the crumbling of the temple and all of that. We are conditioned by these kinds of prophets to imagine that trauma must be a sign of impending good but we have no real hope of seeing the good. Somebody will. The good will be hard to find because first you have to suffer the bad. You've heard prophets like that. You've probably heard preachers like that. But not today. Not today. Because today, we're in the middle of Advent, and today we get Jesus' response to the question. Is it time? Are you the one? Is it now? And Jesus has a different perspective, wouldn't you know? Because today, in the midst of a pretty horrible time for John's friends, they know what's going to happen. You'd have to be an idiot not to know that somebody in Herod's prison was not coming out in one piece. It's a hard time for them. It's a hard time for the nation. And they say, John wants to know, Jesus, if you're the guy. What can we tell him? Bring the man a little hope, right? And Jesus tells him to look around. Look closer. Open your eyes and tell John what you see and hear. If it's signs of God's salvation you want, just open your eyes. It's already happening. The blind receive their sight. The lame walk. The deaf hear. The dead are raised. Wake up. Pick your head up out of the newspaper and look around. It might be a bit of a stretch, but I think that's our Christmas lesson. And it is the lesson that Christmas offers us. We spend 2 weeks talking about the end of all things and the beginning of Advent in this particular cycle of the year. We spend a lot of time with John the Baptist. We think on the prophets. And if we're being honest, we don't really hear the hope that Isaiah brings us because it seems, not to affect us. Watered deserts and singing creation and all of that. It's a little too over and above. But Jesus says the signs of God's new thing are always in sight, right before our eyes. You don't believe me? Can't really blame you. But the first Christmas was kind of like that. Nothing good comes when the ruler of an occupied territory decides he needs to raise his income a little bit and taxes the nation and sends refugees marching hither and thither. And yet good news is delivered in the midst of that to shepherds. A bit of news, by the way, that did not change the economic realities of their lives one little bit. It made them dance for joy, and people accused them of public drunkenness. But on December the 26th, they went right back to their shepherding business. Nothing seemed to have changed. And oh yes, a baby born in poverty in a makeshift delivery room. And yet the fortunes of that holy family were not instantly changed. They were still on the run. Eventually they have to flee the country. And it's years before they can come back. Good news of great joy for all people. Turns out that news comes in the middle of the grinding, miserable, hard work that is necessary to survive under Roman occupation. And it was just as miserable and just as discouraging the days, weeks, and years after Jesus' birth. Yet our Christmas celebrations point to hope. And they offer joy and they resonate with good cheer. We light candles in the darkness. We sing songs with abandon. The state of the world remains unsettled. For some of us, it's even a miserable place to be. Is our faith just about endless, pointless optimism? Are we expected to stand and sing and cheer and wave in spite of what the world has come to? Or is there something else at work? John's disciples want to know that. Is our hopeless optimism at an end? Are you the one, Jesus of Nazareth? Is our waiting over? Is the kingdom finally come? And Jesus says, trust what you see. Trust what you hear. Then, as now, people are conditioned to respond to the bad stuff. How many of you have shared with me recently that you don't watch the news anymore for any longer than you have to? I'm tired of it, I hear over and over again. It's discouraging. I can't do anything about it. It's like a drug. You need to be aware. You need to know what's happening. And so you feed yourself with that little bit of poison, and it takes you down a really rocky road. We're conditioned to the bad stuff. You can blame the media if you want, but it started with the prophets. It starts in the church. How many people, when I talk to them and tell them what I do for a living, say, oh, that fire and brimstone stuff. That's the church of our memory. That's the church that left us quaking in fear and wanting to do all of the right things, because we're conditioned to the bad stuff, the grim signs and reminders of a world gone to ruin. Thank you very much, prophets of ancient Israel. Thank you very much, the church of the late 18th century and 19th century and into the 20th. Thank you very much. But Jesus stands in the midst of a ruined world and points to the good things. Look at the wonder. Find the joy. Look, there's healing and recovery, victory of the little things over the big things. And Christmas can do that for us. Christmas gets it started for us. That's why it's at the beginning of the liturgical calendar. Yes, people still suffer. For some of us, Christmas is not a joy-filled experience. And yet we still insist on singing songs of joy. Not to spite them, but to remind them. Yes, the grim reminders are still as close as the nightly news, but if you look closer, you'll see what Jesus sees. You can see what God is doing if you would only just look. Neighbor helping neighbor. Laughter drawn out of sadness. Against all odds. You will see and hear tidings of joy for all people. And make no mistake, Jesus is not asking us to be joyful in spite of the problems and challenges. He doesn't want false optimism. Instead, we're invited to see the good among the bad, the wonderful in the midst of the ordinary. Today, Jesus calls us to look around and really see. Because whatever you learned in Sunday school and whatever you think the prophets are telling you, whatever the news told you this morning, God is already at work and has been for eons. The good news is in our midst. And all we need to do is open our eyes. Amen.